I read Working Backwards and I felt discouraged after reading it.
Yeah. So let me say something that might surprise you. Most PRFAQs should lead to a no-go decision. You want to avoid making mistakes when you have a product that might cost $100 million, which is the opposite of PowerPoint for pitch decks. It's so easy to open Google Slides and in 30 minutes have something to feel good about it, yet it's full of flaws, right? It lacks the critical thinking, it lacks depth, it lacks the articulation of the problem correctly. And you really don't get that when you are in a slide deck culture is, I'm gonna build this beautiful slide and then I'm gonna do the ta-da, here's the beautiful thing that I did. And for me, there is really three core values here, which I call the superpowers of writing a narrative. The first one is writing helps you think critically. If you write something, it doesn't feel coherent, your brain wants to go back and like rewrite because they say like, this makes no sense. The second one is
Really quick before we get into the interview, listeners and subscribers to this podcast will get a promotional link from Marcelo to get a good deal on his new book, The PRFAQ Framework. If you want to get access to this book at a discount, please go to wayofproduct.com, episode 140, and you will find the link there. I read the book before releasing this episode, and it's been instrumental in making my written language and strategic thinking more concise, targeted, active. And it's a really short read, like 200 pages. I think you'd really like it. Now let's get into the show.
Hi, Karim. Thank you for having me. I'm Marcelo Calbucci. I'm the author of just released book called The PRFAQ. My career has been around tech for the last 25 years, both Microsoft and Amazon, but I also have done 18 years around startup studios, incubators, that kind of journey, always being the person that leads the engineering team, the product team, the UX team, the data team. I have a lot of experience on all of those things, and I'm looking forward to talking to you.
I've just finished reading The Everything Store, so it's good that you're booking the interview with this podcast. Is really interesting timing because I was already like reviewing a lot of the book Working Backwards, The Everything Store, going through like Jeff Bezos' letters. And I like to read three books on a very similar track. Like I'll read three books about a topic at the same time because I found that, okay, the Jeff Bezos' letters is like the polished, everything's working version. The Everything Store is the behind the scenes, how hard it was to do what they did. And then Working Backwards is the direct reports of Jeff and their perspective on like how Amazon was successful. And my hypothesis after going through all these books about what makes Amazon Amazon is Jeff Bezos. Now we talk about like the PRFAQ and stuff, but I think what made it so effective was this strong visionary product leader willing to grind for decades to hit his vision. How could someone like me, right? I think like whenever I use a PRFAQ and I hold a high standard to it, I'm not just going through the motions. I get a ton of value out of the exercise. But how does someone get value out of it when you don't have a Jeff Bezos steering you to do it right and you have high performing peers? How do you hold a high standard and really get value out of a framework?
Yeah, I really don't think you need a Jeff Bezos there. And when I was at Amazon, Jeff wasn't there anymore. And the company was still holding that high bar for how you write a PRFAQ, how you review a PRFAQ, what should be included, what should not be included. So I don't think it's necessary. The hard thing is it does require discipline. It's an exercise. You need to put the hours, you need to put the time, you need to be intentional about it, which is the opposite of PowerPoint for like pitch decks or a slide. Like it's so easy for you to open Google Slides and in 30 minutes have something that you feel good about it. Yet it's full of flaws, right? It lacks the critical thinking, it lacks depth, it lacks the articulation of the problem correctly. The PRFAQ helps with that. It's not an easy framework. It's by design not meant to be easy. It's meant to be truthful. So you really think hard about this problem. So that's how I would position this.
Walk me through the rituals. So I know a few people who worked at Amazon and maybe we'll look at it in the context of Amazon, right? Because there's this culture that exists now that is growing bigger than Jeff, right? Like the standard are still there because I think a lot of Jeff's lieutenants are still at Amazon and they're carrying on the legacy. There's this phrase from a design leader I really admire, J.B. Chikowski, where he says that culture's a patina. It's like the wear and tear on the well-worn leather product, where the wear and tear actually makes the thing more valuable, right? There's definitely this culture at Amazon. I've heard that the boot camp for new product managers is you take a writing course when you first start.
I think there's two things here.
Yeah.
First, my entire book is based on the premise that what works for Amazon might not work for everyone else. So what I
Okay.
did is on the title of the book, it says adapting Amazon's innovation framework. So what I did
So
is,
you got ahead of all my objections in the title.
so I got what Amazon did and said, how can you replicate this outside of Amazon? The PRFQ process at Amazon is very heavy. It's very data driven. It's very research driven. It involves many people. You might spend months doing a PRFQ at Amazon because you're really talking about a project that might cost $100 million.
Wow.
And like you want to avoid making mistakes when you have a product that might cost $100 million. So you do financial modeling, you do user research, you do proof of concept, right? And incorporate all that information to a PRFAQ to make sure that is this an opportunity worth pursuing or not? And it works for Amazon because Amazon is a really big company full of resources. You can tap on a bunch of streams of roles to help you build that PRFAQ. Most product managers don't have access to that in most companies. The other side of the PRFAQ is very useful for founders and entrepreneurs trying to figure out what to build, what their customer need. As a founder, usually it's just you or just you and a co-founder to get started. You don't have that level of resource. If you just replicate what Amazon had and try to apply to other organizations, it's simply not going to work. And I love the book Working Backwards. I was really fascinated. I read the book before I joined Amazon. And actually, the book made me even more interested in joining Amazon because of the writing culture and everything that happened there. But it's a book report on how Amazon does things. And I think it's really hard to get that and say, let's apply those lessons to other companies. It's the same thing as you come from a design background. It's the same thing as someone that work at Apple saying, yeah, I'm going to go to this startup and build products the same way that Apple built products. It's just not going to work. That is a long way of answering a question of this is different. There is the Amazon way, which I can talk about it, but there are the other way as well, which is more lightweight, more streamlined, more focus on iteration.
Yeah, I think I'd like to touch a little bit on why taking something that works very well at legendary companies, like why taking something at face value, like just reading Working Backwards. Like I read book Working Backwards and I felt like discouraged after reading it because I'm like, I feel like I need to be like in charge for this to work. And then a lot of product designers have the bias of being like, let's do it like Apple, this
Yeah.
contained ecosystem. But the reason you can't do Apple is because Apple has like program managers. They have like roles of people, like dedicated roles to make sure all the trains are running on time. Like how you get those very like interconnected ecosystems. There's like supporting operational roles to keep everything in place so that there is this amazing interconnected magical ecosystem that makes it feel like the Apple products were designed by less than 50 people, but it's hundreds and hundreds of people to make this happen. What's your perspective on why the Amazon process doesn't work beyond just financial models? Because sometimes you need extra subject matter expertise and companies to make it work. But why does copying most things directly from the book not work for most frameworks?
I think that's a fair question, and I put a lot of thought into that. I mentioned that in the book as well. Even the way Amazon does recruiting and promotions impact the culture of the company. Same thing for Apple. So you can't just take one gear of this big engine and try to use in another engine. Like it doesn't work like that. And at Amazon, everyone has heard about the leadership principles, which really trickles down through everything that Amazon does. Like how you're customer obsessed and bias for action. Like that shows up on not only a PRFAQ, but on the promotion document, on the planning document, on COEs, which is correction of error that Amazon does as well. to improve its process and customer results. So there is a lot there that is very hard to say, let's do like them, because you never know how they do it, really. And even I, that worked there for a couple of years, been very involved. And you say, let's replicate that in another company. I don't think it's possible in a startup. I don't think it's possible in a big company, right? There is too many intricacies that it's hard to replicate, particularly because of the people involved, right? So a lot of these rules that exist in big companies and how people do things are not written, just passed from person to person. So unless you can hire everyone from the same organization, like you're not going to be it like that.
There's a lot of tribal knowledge. There's a reason why the value of a leader can be measured by like how much of their team they can bring with them when they get hired. It's easier to hire people you've worked with in the past. You see this in Hollywood, like the entertainment industry. Christopher Nolan uses the same cinematographer for every movie. Like he doesn't try to it's not like it's not just a role, it's a competency. And he's not going to risk his film by just hiring any old cinematographer. The same thing happens in like most product scenarios. Like what I've seen when I've worked with, because I haven't personally worked with a big tech company, I like having broad scope. And so growth stage startups is where I found my niche. But whenever I work with someone that's worked at Amazon or Google, they don't do super well because they're like, at Amazon, I did this. Yeah, I wrote like very amazing documents and stuff like that. But they had this huge support network to help them do it. You have this operations team like booing you up when you're PM in that scenario, that you don't realize how much logistical work is happening so that you could make a document to that level. And so maybe the next question for me is, like you said, impossible to replace Amazon. Like Amazon's Amazon for a reason. They're one of the best for a reason. And the variables are incomprehensible to one human that wasn't a part of the company for all those years. But let's say, hey, I see the value of narratives. I see the value of writing and using writing as a thinking exercise. Where can I start then? Like, where's the adaption happen?
Yeah. So I think, let me roll back a little bit on my own experience, right? After spending like 18 years building startup and joining Amazon, it was like a little bit of a shock. I was in companies that had 100, 200 people, and then suddenly I'm in a company that has 1.5 million employees and a whole different structure of doing things. What I observed when I joined Amazon, first of all, the whole writing culture and narratives and everything that you write and review, it's very unique. It's very different. So the first like week or two that you are at Amazon and you literally review like 2, 3, 4 documents, you feel this is so strange. Like everyone is in a 60-minute meeting. The first 20 minutes, you're reading a document in silence. And then you have a discussion based on what's written in the document. No one needs to say anything else besides what is on the document. Then you start debating, I don't agree what was here. I don't agree with what was there. I think this is brilliant. That kind of discussion. It was like quickly after a few weeks, I was like, this is very valuable, because in the startup world, we don't have a lot of that. It's such a slide deck driven culture. I think GitLab is a great example. They do a lot of documents. Stripe does a lot of documents, and they use documents to debate the merits of features and everything that they do. So there is value on that. So as I observed that, it was like, how can we adjust this and make it useful for people that are not on Amazon, but they could benefit from the value that writing creates? And for me, there is really three core values here, which I call the superpowers of writing a narrative. The first one is writing helps you think critically. That means like if you write something, it doesn't feel coherent, your brain is not happy about it. Like your brain wants to go back and like rewrite because they say this makes no sense. So it helps you think critically. The second one is as you write something and you rewrite it, you learn how to articulate ideas better. You get this clarity in your brain. And it's like, oh, I know how to talk about it. The same way I know how to talk about PRFQs because I wrote a whole book about it that helped me articulate this idea better. Is it the same idea behind like teaching help you learn? So writing helps you learn as well. The last superpower is to inspire people around a document. Because when people feel like I'm contributing to this document, I'm writing with you, like I'm providing feedback, I'm telling you what I like, what I don't like. They are more committed. So they feel a sense of ownership towards that. These are the three superpowers of using narratives. And you really don't get that when you are in a slide deck culture. Is I'm going to build this beautiful slide and then I'm going to a meeting. I'm going to do the ta-da. Here's the beautiful thing that I did. Everyone, please give me all the praises. And that's not the same thing. You don't get the same level of value.
Yeah, going back to why people don't understand what makes Apple Apple, and they think that they could just take the external indicators of Apple, is they think that the marketing decks that are used in like their demos, like WWDC, are how they do internal slide decks. And I'm just going to assume they don't make decks that nice for internal work, but it's inspired a lot of designers to make really beautiful decks for internal communications. The work speaks for itself, but it depends on people paying attention. There's a psychologist that talks about like most of your brain's processing power is for visual, like recognizing objects, relationships between objects.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes like a slide deck so easy is that you could make like a diagram and you think, oh, yeah, this makes sense to me. But every time I see someone else's diagram, I have to like use my attention to make sense of the diagram still. And the problem with the reason why documents are heavy on cognitive load is because you have to use your attention systems. There's no like shapes to like recognize. And so your brain isn't wired for that. And so you have to like literally slow down, make sense of the words in the meeting. And so I guess that was like the whole inception of the PRFAQ when I like read the everything stories that Jeff wanted to encourage no shortcuts.
Yeah, you're probably familiar with Edward Tufte and the work he does in visualization. Story says Jeff was inspired by that when Edward was talking about the problems with PowerPoint and the lack of clear thinking that PowerPoint created. Jeff
Yeah.
was like, let's move to a text format then. And like I said, on a diagram, you might see a diagram on the screen and say, oh, this makes sense. But you walk away and then 5 minutes later, you go, wait a second. There is this thing that is missing here. We didn't talk about that. And you come off that meeting feeling like I didn't get that part. And someone else come out of that meeting feeling like, oh, I assumed this is what they meant. And someone else come in that meeting like assuming something different. And now you have three people that were on the same meeting, so the same presentation, moving in different directions. Exactly because you fill the gap with your own assumptions about things.
Yeah, and you want to be polite. You don't want to be seen as rude. It might be a big meeting and the culture isn't as confrontational or it doesn't allow for disagreement. Like you could disagree and then be cut out of the project. Actually, that happened at work. Like, if someone showed a diagram and the diagram had annotations, so it was a mix of visual and writing. And you're reading the annotations and then the text-based slides after the diagram explaining like how it's going to work like in practice. And you're like, wait, there's an incongruence. There's a complete misalignment between what the diagram's visualizing and what's being said in the annotations. The thinking's sloppy, but you're like, how do I address this? And
And
you get put in an awkward position, like you're the bad guy.
yeah, I think it's really hard to create good visual aids like diagrams or tables or graphics or charts or pyramids or whatever, like really hard. But on PowerPoint or Google Slide, you press a button and boom, you have something and you feel good about
Yeah.
it. And that's a problem.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned Tough. Like, what's funny is Tough's whole career isn't about writing culture, but he talks about, but Tough, like, if someone doesn't know who Edward Tough is, like, I had a whole module when I was going to design school about data visualization. Tufts is like the pioneer of creating data visualizations that like you could look at it and it tells the story amazing.
Hmm.
But that requires, ironically, like to get to that level of visualization, it requires levels of iteration and slow thinking, just like writing. Most visualizations in corporate America are rushed, done within 2 working days. There's not a lot of iteration. There's no critique or review sessions. It's just, I'm the VP. I'm going to make a diagram of like how I think it's going to work. It's probably a level 0 diagram or -1 diagram. Like it's so like conceptually obtuse that it's not going to actually mean anything. It's just to fill in the void of the presentation. What I'm hearing here is that this is the case for slow thinking, even in the world of ChatGPT and Claude and being able to generate the content fast enough. Like it's not as hard to generate volume in written content. There's still a case to be made to just do the work.
Yeah. And I think there is a particular use case here where thinking and writing is very important. If you're making a strategic decision
Yeah.
that is really important, you don't want AI to think for you. You want to do this, right? And when you ask ChatGPT, create a business plan or create a strategy for an app, website, or for a podcast, whatever, like you're telling AI, do the thinking for me and just give me the results. You're losing so much by doing that. Your brain is not engaged at a different level. However, if you're doing things that are more tactical, like you need to write your own like resume, like it doesn't require a lot of strategy. There's lots of good patterns out there. So you need to think, what am I doing here? If it is about strategy and vision and mission, probably you should be doing all the writing and thinking yourself, not like outsourcing. Not that you can't use ChatGPT to ask questions and help you brainstorm certain things, but you want to do the core of the thinking.
The heuristic I'm hearing here, like the rule of thumb, is the difference between a PRFAQ and a normal PRD for a software feature, where it's an iterative improvement to existing software. If you're just iterating on existing software, you're not drastically changing the functionality or the value proposition. The strategy's already been set, at least for you as an individual contributor.
Yeah.
Oh, the PRD is to add some kind of tagging functionality because we feel strongly that based on customer interviews, they are struggling with this bit of usability. You need to tell Claude, hey, can you just form that in a clean way so that I could get it to the engineers faster? But when it's like, what is the identity of this product? What's the positioning? What market segments are we going after? That's when you should be doing all the writing because you need to struggle. Is that the difference between a PRFAQ and the PRD?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way. And by the way, I've been thinking about this. Like, how do I describe when you really want to use LLMs versus when you want to do the hard writing? I think on the PRFAQ, like you are asking questions about who is my customer, what problem they have, how are they solving this problem, like how important it is for them. Is the problem growing or not growing? The writing helps you think about what you don't know and forces you to do some research to come back and finish the writing versus the LLM doing all the research and the writing for you.
Yeah.
On the PRD, I think it can go both ways, right? The example that you gave with tagging, I think it's great. Very tactical, right? Like to be like, oh, let me research all the ways there are to do tagging and all the examples and patterns and like
Financial model.
like
What's the revenue potential here?
you're not going to create that much value by doing the work yourself, right? So you might as well leverage LLMs to do that. On the other hand, if you're going to do a feature that is about a premium feature on your product that requires upgrading, that is very strategical, right? Because now you're talking about, hey, are we going to lose users if they don't pay and they feel that feature should be free or on the lower plan? It depends on the type of PRD that you're really doing. But then on that case, I would say like you should have done a PRFAQ first and then a PRD later.
Yeah, because the PRFAQ probably tells you what the actual like solution framing is. Because you don't want to just be like, I think where the reason like most product managers fail is bad judgment. They think their job is to have all the ideas and tell designers, hey, I need some list views, detailed pages, like this is what's going to solve the problem. And then, I mean, as a designer, that was super frustrating. Just like, I know you didn't put a lot of thought into this. My job
Yeah.
isn't to just take orders. I'm a staff designer. I'm a very expensive order taker. If like you get to just pull something out of thin air and say, oh, I just put a field here. Right. But maybe you should decide, wait, why? You gotta ask the question, why is it a field? How did you come to the conclusion that we need to add yet another field and yet more work to the customer? Is there other ways to solve this problem? You haven't thought about it? Then maybe we're not ready for a PRD.
Yeah, I think the PRFAQ comes before that type of discussion, right? Talking
Yeah.
about big picture, why we're doing this, what problem are we trying to solve? Does this problem
Mhm.
even exist? And the solution that we're proposing, by the way, that you should do in collaboration with your team, right? The ideation should be done in collaboration. Does it actually address the problem that we're talking about? So one thing that you'll be surprised is like how many times you read something that someone wrote and the problem and the solution are not aligned. You feel like, yeah, we can build that, but it's not going to address the problem that you just described. So PRFAQ helps you, not only you writing the document, but like reviewing with other people collaborating, helps you suss out that kind of disconnect, like incoherence.
Yeah, there's a really famous fantasy author, Brandon Sanderson. I don't know if you're familiar with who that is.
No.
he's a prolific author. Like he writes, I think like 2,000 words a day. He's written so many books. He basically has like the Marvel cinematic universe of his fantasy novel universe. Like he's a fantastic writer, and he was doing lectures on being a professional writer. Brandon Sanderson has all the lectures. It's a university lecture talking about the business of being an author. Anyone that wants to go to product management should listen to them because it's fascinating how he talks about like, all the different variables. Like the size of the book impacts how many pages you write in a book, impacts if a printer can actually print it, physically print it.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of requirements and stuff. But what he was talking about is like the difference between discovery writers, which are just writers that like write a book without any structure, like Stephen King, and people that make frameworks. The gardeners are the discovery writers. Like you're tending to the story, like you don't really have a plan. You're watering it. You're seeing what comes out of it. And then there's writers who make the framework, the outline. They're called architects. You create the outline of the story and then you fill in the gaps with discovery writing. And you need both, right? Usually you want to do high level overview of the idea and then shelf that. Then you do discovery writing. You're a gardener. Like you're just pumping out prose. And as you're doing that, you like hit a block and then you're like, oh, do I need to adjust the structure a little bit? And the discipline is sitting down and just doing the writing because you can't hit the limits of your thinking unless you do the work.
One thing that I like to say as well is a lot of people say, I need to have more clarity before I start writing. And I think people are getting that the wrong way. It's the other way around. The writing is the thing that brings clarity. When you sit down to start writing and you start filling the gaps, the clarity starts to appear in your mind and you find, oh, I need to know more about this. I need to involve this person. I need to talk to customer about this thing here. A great example of this is when you sit down to write an email to a peer, engineer, designer, manager, whatever, halfway through writing the email, like on the second or third paragraph, you go, actually, no, let me erase everything, and let me send another email. That's writing help you think through the problem and you getting the clarity that, oh, wait a second, that's not the problem I need help with. It's something else. So sitting down to write is probably the right place to start, not get clarity first.
Yeah, and it probably should just be a blank page instead of a template because the template gives you the false sense of completion if you could fill out all the sections. Shreyas Doshi talks about how whenever anyone asks him on LinkedIn, how do I know if I completed the template correctly? He'll just say, I'm reluctant to give you a template because then you'll feel like the template's going to help you answer the question. You should just start from a blank page and struggle for a few weeks.
I don't know if I
As
agree
you,
with that. I have
okay,
different view about that.
no,
The blank page is very scary to a lot of people.
yeah,
They need some reference. Most people, including myself, want something to hang on to, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. It doesn't have to be super prescriptive. Although the PRFQ is quite prescriptive in the way it's approached. The reason it's prescriptive is so that when people are reading it, they are very
yeah,
familiar with the format.
okay,
If PRFQs change from PRFQ to PRFQ, it makes it harder for everyone reading to understand how to navigate it. And that's why the first page is a press release, and then you have 5 pages of frequently asked questions, and the questions tend to follow a pattern. You can have whatever question you want, but usually you want questions that talk about what is the problem that we're trying to solve. I always recommend start there. If you can't answer that question, nothing else matters, right? At least one paragraph about the problem you should write, right? And then another paragraph like who is the customer and why are they having this problem? So those are the things that go into there. And there is a combo in a PRFQ, which I call questions that are factual. Like the problem of a customer is a fact. It's not an assumption. It's not a hypothesis. You need to go out there and understand that problem actually exists. If it is an assumption, you should call it an assumption, which is okay too. You're in a fact-finding mission to understand the customer, the problem, the market, the solutions, yada, yada. Then there is everything else that are hypotheses and assumptions, which is all about your solution, how we're going to deal with it, how customers going to find it, how we're going to price it, how we're going to build it, what are the boundaries that you set. These are not facts. These are opinions.
mhm,
And you want
yeah,
feedback on those opinions. At least on the fact side of things, it's very easy to have a framework because you
yeah.
can like quickly see, oh, this is what I'm missing, right? To continue the opinion side of things, which are your hypothesis and your assumptions.
The PRFAQ template really just starts with all of the e- frequently asked questions you anticipate. People tend to ask, what's the problem? What's your hypothesis? You could write those out in the first draft of the PRFAQ. You might anticipate, depending on the nature of the project, like pricing. And so like you'll pre-write that before you get feedback. And the following drafts are questions you didn't consider. This is what I tend to do when I'm writing. I'll start with the template or whatever my manager wants, but then add sections. And so it's like when someone asks me a question or like comments and Confluence, I'll just copy that question and put it into the FAQ section and say, okay, I'm going to answer this one next. So you start with the base template. People are always going to ask about the problem. Like, what's the customer problem? People are always going to ask, why now? What's the proposed solution? Inevitably, there's going to be custom questions for the specific initiative. Is that how it works? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. However, you don't include all questions that people ask you. There is a list that you apply to the questions, which is this question strategic or not strategic? Let me give an example.
Yeah.
If you're in a meeting with the engineering team and the engineering team is, are we going to host this on AWS or Azure? That's not a question that belongs in a PRFAQ because it's not strategical.
It
Like
doesn't have to do with
yours,
the outcome.
yes, your customer couldn't care less.
Oh,
And
okay.
so you wouldn't include that in a PRFAQ at all because it's a planning and a roadmap and a tactical decision. You know, it maybe fits into a PRD or a technical architectural document, but not a PRFAQ.
Yeah.
So you listen to the question and say, does this question influence strategy and vision or not? If it does, probably should be on the PRFAQ. If it doesn't, then leave for some other document. Like start building your PRD with those questions.
Oh, wow. So the litmus test is, what does it have to do with the press release page, right? Because it's how is that question leading to this intended outcome of being able to meet the customer promise one day? Once, if we're
Yeah.
successful, we should be able to meet this promise. The question you hear is, oh, I didn't think about that. That would have to be addressed if we were able to hit this outcome.
Yes.
And that's the litmus test, not the, yeah, but what design system are we going to use? Or wait, what about any logistical detail that has nothing to do with delivering on the promise? Irrelevant.
Yes. And that's why, the way I propose PRFAQ should be done, it should be a week or two exercise, not a long stretch of 3 months working on this perfect PRFAQ, thinking about everything. The PRFAQ it's going to give you the boundaries for you to go do all the other work. So that's how I like to think about it.
Assuming the thinking is clear, what happens if the person doing the PRFAQ is doing it, but they find it's taking longer than 2 weeks because they're learning more and more about the strategic problem? Like, what does that tell you about like that PRFAQ?
Yeah. So let me say something that might surprise you. Most PRFAQs should lead to a no-go decision.
So you're doing all this work, like it's science, right? The job is to disprove the hypothesis.
Something
Yeah.
like that. Not
Yeah.
exactly you want to disprove it. You want to be really hard on it because you still want to experiment with the unknowns, right?
Yeah.
But if you're doing PRFAQs right, you're going to realize that after writing the PRFAQ or reviewing the PRFAQ, it's like, this is actually not a good idea. We shouldn't pursue this, right? And the example that I can give you to you, it's very personal. I wrote a PRFAQ back in January to start a new investment vehicle for founders. And I wrote the document, and at the end of writing the document and researching what I need to research, I realized this is not worth pursuing. So a PRFAQ helps bring clarity on the decision to do or not do something. And if you decide to do something, it puts the boundaries on it. But what it doesn't do is prioritize against everything else that you're doing on the organization. So it might be that everyone is like, review the PRFAQ and it's a goal. However, you have other priorities, right? And you might still say, we're not going to do this one now. Let's put that on a folder called our PRFAQ backlog. And we come back to it in a quarter or two or in a year. We revive it and review everything to see if things have changed, improved. So that's a very common outcome for PRFAQs.
So most PRFAQs should be not doing this, but there's two categories of not doing this. There's not right now. Like, this is a good idea, but the timing is not good. This is not the right time. Or no, this is a bad idea. Just trash it. Has there ever been a PRFAQ that you've written that's, oh, let's trash it? Not even like it has a chance. But then maybe sometime down the road, you're like, oh, actually, I remember writing about this idea. I have learned new information since then that I want to dig that back up again. Has that ever happened?
Yes, actually, that does happen quite a bit. And like last year, I wrote several, like to write my book and to decide other projects that I wanted to do. And one of them was like, this is not going to be the right idea at that time because of the advancement in LLMs. I was like,
That's
on
true.
top, I was like, I need to go back to that idea and reread what I wrote and see what has changed.
Yeah, the foundational macro is Gustav Sunderstorm from Spotify. He talks about macro headwinds. Like the invention of the iPhone was like a macro headwind. They re-architected all of Spotify because of this new mobile technology. They're like, oh, we're not going to be desktop first
Yeah.
business. This isn't a good idea. This is an existential threat if we don't adapt our tech stack around this. And I don't know if they have a writing culture. They do have that mantra, talk is cheap, so we should just talk
Hmm.
more, and they just talk a lot, which I guess is similar in outcome. But yeah, like
Yeah.
that as a designer, he throws away 90% of work anyways. That's okay. It shows that being a product leader or manager is a creative act. You're creating things and deciding not to move forward with something. But I imagine a lot of PMs who have like MBAs or they're engineers, like waste and inefficiency, like they've come to this field because of the lack of inefficiency. How do you coach someone uncomfortable with the idea of, wait, I spent 2 weeks on this and we're not going to do it?
Yeah.
Like I've seen so many people get frustrated that they're like, wait, I filled the template out. We get to ship it. No, the document shows that this isn't a good idea right now. How do you navigate that conversation?
Yeah, that's a cultural problem, right? It really is going to change from organization to organization. The organizations that embrace innovation more, they probably are more comfortable with that, right? I would say
Yeah.
startups by their nature are a little bit more comfortable to throwing the idea out or like even rewrite entire piece of code and say this didn't work. So you need to shift the culture of the organization to one that stops seeing things that you don't do as failures and start seeing them as what have we learned, right? Because if you really write up your FAQ, you spend 2 weeks, you decide not to do it, and you say we didn't learn anything, then it was a really waste of time, right? At a minimum, you should have learned why is this not a problem for the customer, or why is this solution not feasible right now, or why is this not viable for the business? So you have to have learned something and disseminate that learning as well, so the next person doesn't make the same mistakes.
Yeah, one anti-pattern I've noticed in product managers that I've worked with, this lack of critical thinking from doing agile processes. If I have the engineer do a spike, then that means we're going to have the solution at the end of that spike in 2 weeks, and we're going to be able to ship this. And they're in love with the idea. And I had a conversation with one product manager where I said, the result of the spike was the engineers, I don't know how we're going to do this. And they're like, okay, cool. I'm going to still promise externally that we're going to do this and use this technology. And I just asked, what about that outcome of that spike makes you think that you could still move in this direction?
Hmm.
Like magically unblocks. Oh, I had an engineer do a spike. I feel like that happens a ton in the product industry. If I write a ticket, it will get built. I don't really know how you coach out of that yet. I mean, I have some ideas. I've definitely coached people out of it, but what's your perspective on that? Let's get out of pure FAQ land. Once we've done the thinking, how do we get through the disappointment that your idea wasn't good?
Yeah, I think once you anchor what you're trying to solve in the customer problem and you focus on that, it brings clarity to you. Let's be careful with customer problem here because often the customer problem is not what the customer tells you, right? It's what they themselves cannot articulate, right? So the hard job of the product manager is to understand the root cause of what they're trying to do. Let's go back to that example about tagging. Customers might tell you, I need to tag my files or my emails and I need to organize them this way. And as a product manager, you're going to feel good about it because like you saw 10 customer support tickets asking for the same thing and you go to the leadership, this is so important. Lots of people are asking for it. The real question is, wait a second, why are they trying to do that? What exactly are they trying to do? Maybe what they need is a consolidated list at the end of the month because they have to provide a report to someone. You don't need tagging to do that. We can deliver that feature, which is better. I think a lot of product managers take shortcuts. Instead of trying to really understand the customer, they just listen to what the customer is saying and try to incorporate that in their product.
Yeah, it seems easy. I think that's why a lot of like people think, oh yeah, product management seems awesome. All I have to do is just take orders from the customer, make the customer happy, and I get this really high salary, and we'll go from there. And then I'm not saying that as like hyperbole. Like I've met people that like when you really dig into, oh, why you're product manager? Coding was too hard. I want to make all this money. And that's a real thing. No hating for wanting to make a good living, but the reason why most products are mediocre and are like tables with table filter
Oh,
view
yeah.
UIs is that's the solution to most problems, just tables with filter controls. Sometimes it is, right? Depending on the use case. One of the Jeffisms is being customer obsessed doesn't mean just listening to what the customer has. It is completely empathizing and feeling their pain and then inventing on their behalf. And like as a product manager and designer engineer, you're an agent on behalf of the customer, which means you're making decisions on their behalf that they didn't ask you to do. It's like a lawyer is an agent on your behalf. You're not going to tell the lawyer how to write a cease and desist letter, let the lawyer do it on your behalf. That's what good product management, you're not asking what the solution is, you're asking what's the problem.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's why, on PRFQ should spend a lot of time on the problem space and the customer and really understand what they're trying to do.
Yeah, the customer could be complaining about tagging. Like that, this is actually where the nuance is because earlier we're just like, oh, it's tagging, it's tactical. You could just use ChatGPT to write the ticket and stuff. But then let's say if you are writing the PRD for the tagging solution, and as you're writing it, you're like, oh, wait a second, this isn't the problem. Yeah, it's very rare when you should use an LLM for most requirement docs.
Yeah. Or it could be that you solve the immediate problem that the customer have and create another problem for them.
Like a second order effect.
So that happens often. And as a product manager, you feel good about it because now you have something else to do. Instead of feeling bad, it's a weird incentive that exists.
Yeah. For me, using the PRFAQ, the lesson I'm learning is that the PRFAQ can be successful without having Jeff Bezos breathing down your neck and critiquing your work. You could be an IC and use the PRFAQ because it just requires a subtle reframe. Because people are like, I don't want to do the PRFAQ because like my work gets wasted. And, like, that's the point. That should be the outcome. If you come to peace with the fact that the outcome is you might throw this document away or file it away, not act upon what you were writing about. If you're okay with that, you learned that this is something you should say no to, then not doing anything, it's like the concept of a null hypothesis. A decision can be to do nothing. And you decide not to do nothing is you doing a good job. And that's okay.
Yeah. And engineers do that all the time, right? Like they build a piece of code that's like, I'm just trying a new API to see how it works and then throw it out. Designers do that all the time. Like they start with some wireframes and high fidelity, and they're like, this is not the direction I'm going to go. What is the equivalent for product managers when they're thinking high level about the customer problem and solution?
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of toxic tech bro product management culture on LinkedIn that your job is to get shit done as a PM. It's also your job to not do bad ideas. We're not giving ourselves permission to fail in a very cheap way because it's just a document. You're not throwing away millions of dollars in engineering development dollars.
Yes.
Like you save
Yes.
the company hypothetically huge sunk cost, and you did a good job. And so that's the power of the PRFAQ is that most of the time it should be not now or not ever as the outcome.
One way to summarize this is you're moving from bias to action to a bias to impact.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the Marty Kagan line of instead of time to market, which is the bias to action, like KPI, it's time to money. And it's like, you should be able to answer how is this idea going to get commercialized? How are we going to make money off this idea? And that's your job as a PM is to drive like business impact and revenue through doing the right things at the right time. That's also what probably leads to a more fulfilling career. Marcelo, is there anything that you feel hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off? How can people find your work?
Yeah, so I think we spend a lot of time talking about product managers and how PRFAQ fits into that world. But PRFAQ is really a framework to be used by any kind of innovator. It's a new product, a new process, a new policy, a new service. So anything that you want to create in the world, change in the world, or even remove from the business world, you can write a PRFAQ for. So I say the book is for innovators in general. Of course, product managers, number one audience for that, but any kind of innovator.
Well, yeah, for the designers listening, the engineers listening, the analog for PRFAQ is like a design brief or a solution doc. So, like when I was a designer, I do a very similar thing to a PRFAQ where it was focused instead of the press release, maybe a vision mock of the intended user experience, and then working backwards to how to make that experience happen using words. Some of the best engineers that I know always write a technical design document to show they basically have to build the thing on paper and prove that it's going to work on paper before they write a line of code and then review it
Mm-hmm.
with the engineering team. The PR part sounds like product requirements and it makes it sound like product managers, but like the whole idea here is start with the outcome of what you want to do. It could be a design, it could be marketing, it could be a press release, it could be an actual like technical build, and then use the FAQ format to answer all the questions that lead to that outcome happening. That could be anybody that wants to be.
Yeah. And one thing that you mentioned that I think it's valuable as well is once you write the document, it becomes valuable as the team executes on it, as new people join the team, right? They themselves, instead of going around and asking, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? Why we made this decision? That is a solid vision and strategy document that everyone can read and reread as they execute on the project.
Final question for me before we dive into find your work is, what's crazy is that the acronym might be a little dated because PR, I think product requirements, but it actually means
Yeah.
press release.
Yes.
FAQ, and most people, I mean, including me, what's a press release? It like the press release is just like you're talking about adapting the framework to work with whatever you're trying to do. The
Yeah.
press release is a placeholder for the intended desired outcome.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be written like a press release to be a PR FAQ.
In the book, I give several different examples. It can be an email, it can be a social media post, it can be a blog post. So you can substitute the press release part with other things. Although I do recommend the press release because it makes it very easy to digest. Again, you're making it easy for the reader to understand what you're saying.
Yeah, my understanding of a press release is we still do them, but the understanding of a press release is you're writing to a news organization. So like, how can a journalist write about this and give it press? Interesting. All right.
Yeah.
How can people find your work, Marcelo? Thanks for clearing that up, by the way.
I think the easiest way is just go to Google and search for PRFAQ book, and I'm going to be the number one result there.
Oh, yeah, that's confident. Awesome. Good for you. Marcelo, thank you so much for coming on the show. You have a good one. Hey, listener, thanks again for listening to The Way of Product. As we power down today's session on the fusion of creativity and technology, let's solidify the energy you've gotten from our dialogue today. If you've gleaned insights or strategies that could turbocharge your projects, I have a small but powerful ask. Swing by the platform where you're hearing this and leave a review. Think of it as your digital high five to us. It's a fuel that propels this content to more creative technologists like you, amplifying the impact of the shared knowledge. So until our next interview, keep pioneering and pushing the envelope. Thanks again for lending your ears and your imagination to our community. Catch you on the next download.